Thank you for coming out this afternoon, this early evening for the final presentation of really a many number of days of some real solid work. It seemed last Saturday when I opened it up at the community center, and many of you folks were there, an introduction of Farrell Madden and with the work they're going to be doing. Seemed like a long time ago, at least to me. And then coming through the entire week into this wonderful building and just getting different ideas from you folks, and then also, of course, just sharing amongst yourself, I think is really a testament of the process that the City Council approved to go through the visioning of downtown. And just the great weather we've had, and just for various reasons, I've been downtown a number of times the last couple of days without the rain. It's just very encouraging to see folks and say hi, look around, and kind of see what's coming, at least in principle, and then in practicality as well. I did want to point out, again, thanks for the stakeholders involved here that are here, Community Main Street, Carol and your crew, and various investors and stakeholders, Councilman Blanford and Dara, and Cruz, and I think Mr. Miller's on his way as well. So just my hat's off to you folks for being here. And just by chance, as I was walking up, part of the Community Main Street staff, Kim Bear, you probably know Kim one way or the other, she couldn't make it, but for very good reason. And that was she was ready to ride the shuttle for the first time to help alleviate the parking, and she's going to be doing some videotaping and some sharing on social media and such. So what a great and neat idea, I think, just to get that idea out there to help alleviate the short-term things we have with parking while we're also planning and we're talking to various people just in terms of having that long-term solutions come forward. So again, thank you for coming here, and my hat's off to Farrell Madden and all the work that those folks have done. I think they've really embraced our community, and I think it's also shared the other way as well. I still am amazed now. I think it's been 3 consultants who have been working on various aspects of what we're doing downtown, and without prompting them, I promise, without prompting them, all of them have said it's been very difficult to find mutual type of downtown, some comparables because of the uniqueness that we have here. So again, a testament to so many individuals in this room, young and old, and ready to roll up their sleeves and get ready for just even more of a great future for our community. So I believe I'm turning this over to Mary, and she'll get things started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for coming out tonight because it is a really nice evening. I wanted to give you a little big picture of what we're going to do tonight, and we're going to cover a lot of ground, a lot of information, a lot of ideas. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, so this presentation is going to last a little bit more than an hour. We're going to try to keep it moving. At the end, we're going to have a quick survey that you can respond to what you see, and you will be able to also give us feedback. Tonight's presentation will be available on the web. You can encourage your friends who are not here tonight to take a look. So we will also be able to get feedback that way. But we're not going to do a formal Q&A tonight, so we don't just drag on into the evening. The members of our team will be here, so if you have something specific you want to ask someone about, we will definitely be here to talk with you, but we're not going to do a long question and answer session because we know lots of people probably have things they would like to be doing. I'm not going to name them all. As the mayor alluded, we've had a big team of people here working this week, meeting with all of you, getting ideas, testing them. So if I could have all the members of the Charette team either stand up or wave your hands. We have a few that will be speaking tonight up here, and then we have a few more in the back who have done some of these really beautiful drawings and images that you're going to see about the possibilities for downtown. So I'm going to jump in, and we're going to hand it off a few times so you don't have to listen to one of us the entire time. We're going to try to keep it moving. We're going to start with this project, a vision for downtown. The first thing that we really needed to do as a team was understand your city, your downtown. We've been here a few times. We walk around, we look around, we talk to people. We started back in April with a kickoff meeting. How many of you attended that meeting? I believe it was on April 2nd. So a few people were here then. When we were here in April, we also started by sitting in and listening to the council who set a list of priorities for this project. So we're hoping that we are staying true to those priorities and capturing those, and we will touch on those at the end, and we can kind of test to see if we're meeting those goals that the council established for the project. So we did hear about that. We sat in on that session back in April. We had the kickoff meeting, so those of you who are here know about this. We got around maps and we asked people to identify the places that they liked in downtown in the study area, the places that they didn't like, that they thought needed some improvements. We had a couple of boards. People, you will see summaries out back in the back. You may look at them later. We asked people which buildings they liked, which ones they didn't like, which ones would be appropriate for downtown, either in the core of downtown or the close by neighborhoods. On the right is an example of some of the maps where people put red dots on things they didn't like, green dots on the things that they liked. You gave us a lot of information in April, and we've just been learning continuously since then. Just as a quick example, I'm not sure how well you can see the images. There was unanimity on some images that the red meant people did not want to see anything like this in downtown. So some of that came very clearly to us. There were also some things that a lot of people really liked, or maybe a few people didn't like, but there was a lot of consistencies of the types of buildings that people could imagine in and around downtown. So we're not going to walk through all of those boards, but if you didn't look at them on the way in, you can look in the back and you can literally see how people voted and what they liked and what they didn't like. In addition to hearing what you had to say, part of the job we had was to go out and take a look. We walked around the study area identified by the yellow line. We were literally walking up and down blocks, driving by, finding the hidden park and different things like that, just to see from outsiders' perspective, if you come here for the first time, what's the impression that you get. So we also sort of had, after that first trip, some ideas very clearly that everything in the study area, everything inside the yellow line is not the same. You have a lot of different characteristics in different parts of the downtown and adjacent neighborhoods. So that was sort of our quick snapshot that there were several sub-areas within the study area. As I mentioned, members of our team were literally out walking up and down the streets, taking pictures, seeing what the experience is like as a pedestrian during the day. We noticed some sidewalks that needed some help. There's some really exciting, great activities looking down the street, the range of buildings, the range of activities. When we were here, the leaves still weren't out. As I said, we went out at night, we went out during the day, just trying to get a sense of what's happening in Cedar Falls today. We also like that you have a lot of very unique buildings. A lot of people say protect Main Street, but within the study area, there's some pretty special buildings, some nice architecture. And we know that Cedar Falls has a lot of pride in that historic character, and that's one thing that has come across really clearly. As I mentioned from these pictures, we're not just looking at the core downtown, Main Street, Washington, and State Street. We're also looking at those close by neighborhoods. And what the character should be for them in the future, and where should things be preserved and enhanced, and where there might be changes. Last but not least, we heard a lot about the bike trails and the recreation bicycling. How many of you were here on Saturday morning? So even more than the kickoff, so that's good. Saturday was really another time to circle back and listen to what you had to tell us. So those of you who are here, you know some of the activities that we did. Again, we were working around tables, but instead of just talking about what's here right now, on Saturday we asked people to actually talk about the future. What would they like to see in downtown going forward? Where should there be change? Maybe where should things stay the same? Again, looking at maps in the study area, but instead of using dots this time, we were asking people to share their ideas. After people marked up the maps, they stood up in front of their fellow Cedar, is there a word for Cedar, people who live in Cedar Falls? I don't know. So they're Cedar Fallians, that doesn't, That doesn't sound right. But the individuals from the tables got up and talked with each other and said, at our table, these are the things that we thought were really, really important. And I think those of you who were here would agree that there were a lot of similar ideas, a lot of consistency. There were different ideas, but I think there was a lot of consistency across. We also had people of all ages. We had a couple of young women who also got up and shared their ideas, and I think that speaks a lot for the future of your town. And I had to say, I've forgotten the little girl's name now, but she had more drawings on her map than many of the grown-ups did. But she did get up and tell us, I know she wanted a playground and a swing set for her friends and I think one other thing. So this is just an example of some of the drawings that people did, and some of them are still up on the doors in the back. As my business partner, who's not going to speak tonight because he has lost his voice, likes to say, the drawings are not beautiful, but they have a lot of information. They're rich with information, so we can kind of look at them. In addition to what people stood up and said, we can go back and see what's written on the map that nobody reported. So we had one drawing for every group, and you can take a look at those. So what did we hear when we started going back through? Well, we heard a lot. We told people to only give us 3 big ideas, and I don't think any table was able to limit themselves to 3. But some of the most consistent things we heard, and so these are zooming in so you can see I'm not making this up, that these came off of the maps. A lot about walkability, a lot about improving the sidewalks, a lot about being able to cross First Street safely, especially at First and Main. So I think that one table said that was scary. So we got a lot of descriptive language. Another thing that we heard a lot about is people wanting there to be more street trees in downtown, to take the Main Street landscaping a little further. A lot of people said they would like to have more green space in downtown, or different kinds of green space in downtown. And if you did not know this, a green circle on a map, that's a universal symbol for a tree. So you will see quite a few people were just drawing green circles all over downtown. And we heard, maybe not as much, but we did hear a bit about bicycles and bicycle lanes and where they might make sense in downtown. Recognizing that you have all the recreational trails, but people saying if you want to go somewhere that's not on the trail, we need to have safer routes for bicycles. Then this week, our team here has been chained to our desk in the front parlor, working away, and we have had an open studio so people could come in and see what was going on. Few people could drop in, they could add more comments to the maps. We were working on drawings, which you'll get to see, testing ideas when people said they wanted something and would it fit on a certain block, discussing ideas. In addition, while we were doing that, on Tuesday, Wade, who you'll hear from later, did a lunch presentation, sort of big picture about mobility, walking, biking, transportation, and parking, and it was at a sort of more general level. And tonight he's going to talk a little bit more specifically about those issues for downtown Cedar Falls. We also had a series of technical meetings, what we like to call a reality check, which is, when every table said they wanted the wastewater treatment facility to be somewhere else. Well, we met with the guys and we got to hear about how much it would cost and where it could move and how much would need to stay there. So we wanted to hear all the visionary ideas, and during this week we came back to try to test them and say, okay, what would it cost to do this? How practical is this? Is there a way? Will the market support this? How much of this can we really move forward on? How much may be really short term, and some of it may be you need to keep making a plan, but it may be 10 or 15 years down the road. So that's the task that we had with all the great ideas. Can we bring those into reality? So we started synthesizing ideas. We heard from the maps. We heard on Saturday. We talked to the technical folks, going back to what we heard in April, and sort of tried to pull out some common themes and big ideas that would help us have a framework for the vision plan. So it's not just us saying from our team, wow, we really think you in Cedar Falls should do X, Y, and Z. We want to hear what you would like and figure out if there's a way to bring it into being. So I think that these are not necessarily in order, but I think the most consistent thing we heard was the importance of walkability, how people can get around, how they can do it safely, how you can reconnect Main Street to Washington State, but also on to the neighborhoods in Clay and Franklin and Walnut, just as you go west, that people wanted to be able to get in and out of downtown without being required to drive. We heard a lot also about comfort, and that's, I think, where it came into people wanting street trees and awnings on buildings and that sort of thing. Well, I just mentioned that. We heard a lot about people wanting street trees and also some other green spaces. But when you start looking at the map, you start trying to figure out where you could add more green spaces, and that's when you start realizing you have to deal with the real world. But we have a few ideas about that as well. We definitely heard that the parking, we need to rethink parking. Wade's going to touch on that. We know you've had a parking study. We're not trying to revisit that, but we want to make sure that the ideas from the vision plan and the parking study are all sort of moving forward together. We heard very clearly that people want to respect the historic character that is here. That means looking at the context and the scale and the details. But it also means as you move forward, how can you be respectful of the historic character, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're trying to make everything look exactly the same. But we did get very clearly the importance of the historic character, especially in the Main Street area from 1st down to 5th. We also heard several different people saying they would really like to have more options for housing. I can't tell you how many people said, I would really like to live in downtown, but I can't afford to be in one of the new units that's come online. Or maybe I'm getting ready to retire and I have a big house and I would like to be somewhere close to downtown that's no longer 2 stories, but so I could still walk downtown. So Anita, who's our economist who keeps us realistic on the market side, is going to talk about a few of those issues. As I said, we also heard several people say they wanted it to be easier to bike in and around downtown, recognizing that you have over 100 miles of recreational bicycle trails, but if people wanted to be able to bike more easily to come to work, what are the other opportunities for that? Last but not least, I think every table group told us that they wanted a grocery store in downtown and they wanted to move the wastewater plant. I put them on the bottom and they're sort of different because they're a little bit beyond the details of our plan, but we wanted to acknowledge and make sure that the mayor and all the city council people heard these 2 things very clearly. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of different issues related to both of those from both the public and private sector side. But we want to make sure that no one thinks that we did not hear that very clearly. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Wade Walker, who is our transportation guru.
Thanks, Mary. And one of the cautionary things I will say is I'm going to touch on a few items on mobility and parking. And I use the term mobility because it's not just all about the cars, and transportation kind of has this connotation about it being about the cars. But what I will say is that you'll also see things that Keith talks about that will have the mobility and the parking pieces intertwined into some of these ideas for development areas. That is on purpose. That's one of the reasons we all lock ourselves in a room together and we work together, and I get to play Dream Crusher at times from the engineering standpoint, but also get to be aspirational on the design side. So I'm going to touch on a few items that are a little bit outside of some of the proposals that you'll see Keith talk about, but what about the streets and parking? Talking about bike facilities and enhancing walkability. There's been a lot of talk about South Main and what should actually happen on South Main. And you guys had a study done, a traffic study was done to look at it and look at, should it be 4 lanes, should it be 3 lanes, should it be something else? That study clearly indicated that the street could be accommodated within 1 travel lane each direction provision for left turns. We agree with that study. So if you think about that, then what could you have in that envelope? What could actually happen in the footprint of what is South Main today? And what could it do? What you have on South Main is what we call a prototypical 4 to 3 opportunity. The beauty of a 4-lane undivided cross section is it converts very easily to a 3-lane and adding bike lanes. South Main fits right into that context. Your corridor, South Main, your latest traffic count in 2017 was saying about 9,000 vehicles per day. It's been fairly steady over the past 20 years. The traffic volumes there, they fluctuate a little bit, but you haven't seen a lot of growth. You haven't seen a lot of decline. Been fairly steady. Just to give you a little bit of context, that road as is, and these are general numbers, but that road as is would carry in the 25 to 28,000 vehicle per day range. So about 3 times what you have out there today. Capacity for 3-lane is going to be in around the 18,000 range. So about twice what you have today. So thinking about growth, you could double the traffic on South Main with 1 travel lane each direction provision for left turns, and you're still within the threshold of what's there. Caveat is that on urban streets, that capacity is dictated by the number of turns that you have at intersections and the driveways that you have along the street. So the less driveways you have, the more traffic it will carry. So the turn lane, by providing the opportunity for the left turns, it removes the left turning vehicles from that inside travel lane. I've got an example that I showed on Tuesday that I'll revisit just to kind of show you what that actually means in a 4-lane section. What we have also found in these cases is that when you go from a 4 to a 3, you don't automatically lose half the traffic on the road. Traffic volumes will stay steady. We may actually see an increase because there's an increase in perception of safety. And when you add bikes, when you add the provision for bikes and increased walkability, you may actually move more people along that corridor than you're moving it today. In no cases have we ever seen where you do this kind of conversion where all of a sudden half the traffic disappears on the street. Context is a little different on South Main because it's not strictly a commercial corridor, it's more of a neighborhood corridor. But that's one of the things that we hear sometimes in corridors that are a little more commercial. So South Main, I think, falls well within that. So if we think about that and what that street could be, this is the image that I showed on Tuesday with what actually happens on these 4-lane corridors. So as you're driving along South Main and say you're coming up to the signal at 18th, what happens? You get one car wanting to make that left turn, and you get all these others that say, I'm not getting stuck behind that guy making the left, so I'm going to be over here. A couple of things happen there. You're not really using, you're basically using 2 lanes for carrying cars. The other thing that happens is you get somebody that comes along here, one of 2 things can happen. They're texting on their phone, they don't realize that the car is stopped, they rear end them. Or you have somebody that realizes that, hey, I need to get out of this lane and get over here. They don't see the car in their blind spot, they go over and they sideswipe. So you see a lot of sideswipe and rear end crashes. We see those virtually eliminated with this kind of conversion. We also see traffic speed slow. So what can you do in this corridor? Met with the bike ped committee last night and was told that Clay Street is the only on-street bike lane that you have in the city. So the bike lanes on Clay Street are the only on-street bike lanes. So not only can you get on-street bike lanes within the envelope, you can get on-street separated bike lanes and provide some separation for bikes in that under that configuration. You can also introduce this concept of what we call spot medians. Personally, how many people think that these, and I'm going to use a term that I might get disbarred from my engineering friends, the suicide lane, the center turn lane. Does anybody think those are really nice looking streets? Kind of ugly, aren't they? So one of the things that you can do is you can introduce what we call spot medians, still allowing the left turns where you need left turns, but introduce some planting opportunities and start to get some canopy, some tree canopy on the street from both the center, visually narrow the street. Really on South Main with the housing along there, it should have much more of a neighborhood character, provide a really nice entry and gateway into downtown. If we take that same approach with some of these little, what I call appendages that get built, like freeway intrusions into downtown, like the piece on Waterloo Road that comes in from the freeway, you have a similar situation. Traffic volumes don't warrant that kind of cross-section. So a very, very wide 4-lane cross-section. You do have the little pieces of trail that connect into your river trail system. But if we start to re-envision that, similar kind of thing, add some green to the center of the street, still provide for left turns where we need to. You can get some separation with the bike lanes. You'll see in this instance we actually show doing some kind of a planter to physically separate that. And you may be asking yourself, well, we've got a 8-foot path over here. Why do we need additional bike lanes? 8 feet is actually a little below what is recommended for a shared use path. So if you have somebody like the people that we saw with the bikes that cost more than my car that were sitting over here the other night, they like to ride a little faster. And so this gives them a place that they can be separated from the slower traffic or the pedestrian traffic and come right into the river trail system as well. We heard nothing about parking from anyone. I did say on Tuesday that that we weren't going to solve your parking problem. I can't just wave a magic wand and solve your parking problem, but you guys are on your way to solving it. We met with the parking committee and we're rest assured that you've had a study done. The study laid out recommendations and they're working on those. They're working very hard on those. So what we've listed is we've reiterated a lot of those recommendations. The asterisks denote things that are in the current recommendations. So some of the things that are coming. Revising the time limits for on-street parking. So no longer if you want to do the right thing, or if somebody wants to do the right thing and get Uber from a night of drinking and debauchery downtown back home and be able to leave their car, they're not going to come back and find a ticket unless they park it on Main Street. That is changing. So you could leave a car overnight in a downtown space. The other thing that's happening is the time limits are being revisited on all the streets in downtown. So Main Street will remain 2 hours, and then 1 block either side of Main Street. State and Washington, I believe, go to 3 hours. And then it steps down with the 24-hour spaces as you get further out. The city lots are also going to a paid system full-time and be replacing the lollipops that are in the lots with the pay stations that will have the ability to use your phone and pay by mobile, as well as mobile information. All of that's being worked on right now. I'm going to touch on this idea of increasing the walk shed and enhancing the walk shed. Some of the other things that are happening is the streetscape program in downtown. The immediate one is looking at 2nd and 3rd and how those streets can be reconstructed to enhance walkability. Other streets will follow on those. And then again, also monitoring the utilization as well. One thing that was talked about during the study but wasn't a recommendation initially was this idea of remote parking served by shuttle. And it was talked about by events. However, Met has stepped forward and partnered with CMS and the city in providing the shuttle that somebody's videotaping on right now. But you'll be able to park up at the Sturgis site, ride the shuttle, and it'll be every 15 minutes. We'll make a loop on Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. So to try to alleviate some of the parking congestion downtown. Offers another alternative, and it's all about these small alternatives. One of the other things that the study pointed out was that there's a lot of private parking lots in downtown that are used during the day but not used at night. The committee is pursuing, or the city is pursuing, lease agreements on those as well. Broke it up into some short-term, which were immediate, mid-term, longer-term kinds of recommendations. I'm not going to read all of these, but you'll see some of the monitoring. This is where we are actually recommended that completed the downtown visioning. That's happening. We can check that box. Formalizing the relationship for parking management, looking at the branding and wayfinding of downtown parking. One of the things that we would recommend is that as you monitor utilization, go ahead and set some hard triggers that would tell you when you need to go to the next step. And some of those next steps may be consider monetizing the downtown, some of the street parking as well. That would be a step that might need to happen at some point in the future. And then one of the others is really go ahead and start thinking long term as to where, if you were to do a parking ramp, and Keith will be touching on this in one of the proposals, if you were to do a parking ramp, where would it be? What would it look like? Who could you partner with to do that? And go ahead and start setting up your revenue stream so that you could get bonding capacity either through the TIF or through parking revenues to be able to, for the city to be able to participate in that. So again, we agree with everything in the parking study. We think there were some things that may not have been mentioned that we wanted to point out in there. And again, meeting with the parking committee, doing a great job in moving that forward. I will touch a little bit on the importance of making those connections and tying it all together holistically. Right now, everybody wants to park on Main Street. Why? It's a great place to walk. Everything seems very, very well connected. You don't necessarily like parking on State and Washington because those blocks between there and Main are a little, Mary showed some of the photos of the sidewalks, little harrowing. But if we just simply talk about time and what people are generally willing to walk, most people are willing to walk 5 minutes. So what we see here is your Walmart and your Target, and centering on Viking Road. What about that 5-minute walk? I don't know if this is a prototypical supercenter. That probably gets you back to where the paper towels are, back in this corner. So that's about a 5-minute walk. You look at downtown, there's that same radius and that same 5-minute walk. So that same 5-minute walk gets you from the intersection of 3rd and Main all the way down to Main and 7th. And you see the amount of area that it covers. Main Street, Washington State, and all of the parking basically almost covers all of downtown within a 5-minute walk. Why is that important? Well, that's important because as you start to look at streetscaping opportunities on some of the connector streets, such as 2nd and 3rd, by being able to create much more of a walkable environment on those streets, shade, better sidewalks, in some cases being able to add additional angle parking and pick up more parking spaces on street, and then also showing on 3rd is a little bit narrower. You can create a slower speed environment, pick up parking spaces, get the street trees, really create a much better walk and reinforce the connectivity from places that are less than 5 minutes away from Main Street where people want to be. So, Nita?
Okay. So, as we looked at this from a market standpoint and an economic standpoint, there were 5 sort of big topics that I wanted just to share with you that we were thinking about as we put the visioning plan together. And that first would be to start by thinking in terms of intensifying your development with a mix of uses. The market is there. They're growing interest from a lot of people at all different ages and different stages in their lives, looking at a lifestyle that isn't dominated by driving everywhere. They really want to incorporate more walking and biking into their daily life, and so they're looking for opportunities to live closer to work in places where they can walk or bike to their job. So that means we've got a lot of interest in downtown housing. Two main groups, but many others as well. So the younger millennials who are, say, in their late 20s, early 30s now, looking for places where they can live, work, play all in one location. Empty nesters who no longer have kids at home and don't need to keep up a big house, and particularly the snowbirds who want to take off for Florida or for Arizona for a few months in the winter, find the downtown housing really attractive because they can just close the door and go and not worry about who's going to shovel the walk. The same thing is happening in office demand nationally and locally, where the labor market now is so competitive, unemployment rates are so low, we have shortages in all kinds of positions, but especially in the skilled tech world. Those workers want to live and work in the same area. They want to be able to live without a car or not to rely on it exclusively. They will decide in part where they want to work based on whether it's in this kind of a mixed-use environment. So there is interest in downtown office space. You have a very low vacancy rate, and that could expand over time. All that works together to generate new customers for the downtown retailers. So you'll have people who come out at lunch to eat from the offices to eat, and then the people who live nearby will be out in the evenings and on the weekends. It adds a lot of vitality to the street, and it makes it a much more interesting, compelling place to visit. Okay, next would be the importance of facilitating development. Achieving your vision is not going to happen automatically. It's not something the public sector can do on its own. It's going to depend on a whole series of private development decisions and investments. And so we want to encourage and facilitate those investments in a way that's consistent with our vision. That suggests that we need to simplify the zoning code and get it to the point where you can say, here are the 8 things that are important to the community that we know will help to build a better place. If you do all of these 8 things, we will approve your project. And that's part of what happens here with the form-based code. It becomes much more simplified or easy to understand, and it's a checklist essentially that says if you build to the sidewalk, if you have these kinds of windows in your walls, that will make it a better place and will feel more comfortable and attract more people. So we also want to accelerate the approval process so that it doesn't take 2 or 3 years to get zoning approval for your project. The world is changing so fast now that waiting 2 or 3 years means you may miss the market altogether. You may have to wait then another 5 or 6 years until the economy comes back around or the opportunity presents itself again. So we'd like to ensure that the process works so that you won't be in a situation where you've been approved by planning staff, you've been approved by the planning commission, and then at the last vote in front of city council, somebody doesn't like something and you get a no vote. That lack of predictability is really death for a developer. Most of them will tell you, I don't mind the high standards. I like high standards because that means it's a good place for me to make my investment. I just need to know what they are. Tell me what the rules are. I will comply with them. Just don't give me vague language about being compatible. No. So then the third one would be to maintain this great concentration of retail space that you've achieved along the parkade. It's the walk times that Wade showed are exactly right. This is, about the distance between anchor stores and a major regional shopping center, this 4-block area along Main Street. It's very comfortable. You can shop from one end to the other. The stores face each other, so you can go back and forth across the street. That's very competitive. It's part of why your downtown is successful. We want you to reinforce that and not let retail stretch down South Main Street. You don't want a strip of retail down that way or out West First Street, because it lessens the impact. You lose some of the vitality and the energy. So if you're going to expand the retail, let's do it on the side streets and on State Street, still in close connection to the parkade and the stores that are there. You can expand the retail supply, but we want you to do it judiciously. It's a really tough time now in the retail industry, and e-commerce is taking over a lot of the sales that used to happen on a main street. And so we don't want you to overexpand the retail with this idea that it's only a good street if it's all lined with retail. So there are a lot of other ways to make good places and good streets without lining them with retail. So just be careful about how much you put in. The fourth one then would be right-size the parking. So I know you've had a lot of discussion about parking in recent months, or recent years even. But what we're seeing nationally is that in these mixed-use environments, the demand for parking is declining. We see people who are, as I mentioned, they want to be able to walk and bike. And once they're in a position where that's possible, the couple may decide, I could save a lot of money with one car instead of two. And that it works. It still works for me to live with just the one car. And if I don't, if there are situations when I need a car and I don't have one, now as Uber and Lyft become more prevalent, that becomes that relief, that safety valve that helps you accommodate your life without having to have as many cars as we've had in the past. So that means that some of your standards, that one car per bedroom in an apartment bedroom, may be too high. And the reason we care is that the costs of that parking are really significant. If you build a if you build a structured parking space above ground, that can be anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 for one parking space. If you build it underground, it's sort of minimum $30,000 a space. And if the lot is small or it's irregular in its configuration, that can easily go up over $50,000 a space. So if you were talking about a $200,000 condominium, and now you require 2 underground parking spaces where they may only need one space, and it doesn't need to be underground, that $200,000 condo now costs $300,000. So it limits the people who can buy it or who could rent those units, and that's not necessary. If they're not going to use the space, don't force the developer to build it. It wastes a lot of valuable land when you do it on the surface, land that we could be using for better uses that would generate more customers. And because of the cost, it makes rents and sales prices all higher. And then finally, zone for housing variety. You've got some very nice new large multifamily developments going, already completed and under construction, but the market is broader than just the people who want to live in those kinds of dwellings. Think in terms of what we call the missing middle, which is housing that's not single-family detached housing, and it's not a big high-rise apartment building, but something in between. So that could be townhouses, that could be duplexes, which are pretty common here within the downtown area. Mansion houses, which is something that looks like a house but has 3 or 4 apartments in it. Could be small multifamily buildings that could be slotted into smaller lots within the neighborhood, so under 15 units. And then the larger multifamily would be very appropriate as well. So, what do we mean by missing middle?
Thank you, Anita. So this is just a little educational piece. How many of you before tonight have heard this term missing middle? Okay, not too many, but Anita sort of explained the economics and who are the people who might live in these types of places, and so I wanted to show you a few examples just so you know. Sorry about that. We also talked about redoing the zoning code. So when we're talking about missing middle, we're not talking about this. We're not talking about rows and rows of houses that look exactly the same. We're not talking about giant complexes with hundreds of units. And we're also, because we're talking about this, thinking about updating the zoning, you can also put rules in place that talk about how the buildings are designed, how they relate to the street. So what are some examples of what are we talking about? Row houses are very popular in a lot of different places. They can be 2 stories, they can be 3 stories, they can be 4 stories, they can be stacked flats. It's a really nice way for people to live who don't want a lot of yard to take care of, who want to be in an area close, compact. But it doesn't mean you have 20 acres of these. It means they're in a neighborhood setting. A couple of different examples. I think this is the same one that Anita just showed. One thing that's also interesting about row houses is they can do what we call self-park. Oftentimes they can have a garage, an enclosed garage that is accessed from the rear. So we're not talking about doing a whole bunch of these that are sitting in the middle of a parking lot. They are very much designed to be part of a larger neighborhood. Cottage courts are growing in popularity around the country, especially for people who want to still have a small yard, but they don't want a big house. They like the community, the sense of a neighborhood. The small apartments, the one on the left is historic, the one on the right is actually new, or say in the past decade or 15 years or so. So yes, we used to build like this, and people can build this way again, but do you have the market? I think Anita's numbers tell us that you do have a market for this type of housing. Does your zoning allow it or make it easy to do this today? Based on our initial analysis, it probably does not. Your zoning is really set up to do big subdivisions and big apartment complexes. So as we move forward, if this is something that the city says we would like to see some of this, then that's one of the things we may address when we update the zoning. So Anita says the market looks like you do have a market for some of this. So, you know, what does that mean? Interestingly, when I told you we walked and we looked around and we've been up and down every street, you have a lot of this already. It wasn't built recently, but it is sprinkled all through the study area. You have some row houses. You have some duplexes and mansion houses. They look like the single family houses around them. And if you don't live in that neighborhood and you just drive by, you probably didn't notice that there were 2 front doors or 4 front doors. And I'm not talking about houses that were chopped up into apartments. These were designed this way from the beginning. You also at least have one little cottage court that's down on South Main. So we used to do this a lot. We kind of got into this mode of building lots of single-family houses and lots of apartments, but there is a growing interest in looking at this missing middle type of housing again. So we heard some people talk about it, and we know some folks in the city staff are interested in hearing more about it, and Anita's numbers say that it looks like you do have a market. So we wanted to make sure that the folks who came, and when we move forward with the vision plan, have some idea of what this could be. And Keith's going to show you a few, and you have small apartments also tucked in around here. Keith is now going to lead us through all of the aspirational, where are the places around downtown that some of these ideas could be implemented.
Thanks, Mary. So I'm going to play Jeff Farrell tonight. without the cough. Again, my name is Keith Covington. I'm part of the design team that's here. Jeff would normally be standing in this position to do this, the other half of our leadership here for this charrette, but I'm going to walk you through all of this, and it's going to be a lot of stuff. So just bear with me, and we'll get through it, and we can talk a lot about it afterwards. Let me make sure that I'm moving this in the right direction. So one of the things Mary mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation was that when we were here in April and we got a chance to walk around and take photographs, we realized very quickly that our downtown boundary was pretty broad, but there wasn't one flavor for downtown. Not everything looks like Main Street or what's happening on State or Washington. There are a lot of different flavors. And whether you know it or not, your input since that time has helped to also confirm those observations that we've had. And you've helped us by giving us input on certain areas and what you think the vision for those areas should be in the future. You have helped us. And so one of the first things that we do before we start drawing buildings and so forth is we do what we call a kind of a framework plan. And it's basically a diagram that starts to get at those different character areas in downtown, realizing that it is not one flavor. And so this is the work in progress map for the character areas. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through them. I think most of them will be self-evident to you. But you've got the core downtown here and kind of a sub-district, historic Main Street, because we heard that the character of historic Main should be respected and so forth, and that the area around that should be similar to that, but could be perhaps a little bit different than what's happening in that preserved core. Then, of course, you've got South Main Street, one of your main southern gateway into this area. And Wade's already talked to you a little bit about the street and some of the potential improvements to the street. That also applies to the development that could occur along it and what the character of that area might be. There's also this transition area along Clay. It's kind of got a mixed bag. There's some offices or commercial uses, there's some residential uses and so forth, but it's, what did I do? Okay. Whoops. Back. Okay. Looking for the laser pointer here. It's not our transitional neighborhoods. It's not transitioning to the single family neighborhoods, but it's not the core of downtown either. So it definitely had a distinct character. The southeast neighborhood here, as well as the west neighborhood, some similarities, but there are some differences there as well. Now, a couple of other areas I want to point out. The northwest area here, we talked a good bit about that, and we see a lot of opportunity there. It's probably more or less going to be residential. It's kind of across First Street, obviously. And then 18th Street Gateway, we're still working on that area too, because it is a gateway, and you've got the off-ramp there, and that intersection needs some improvement. So we're still working through that, but it's definitely distinct in terms of its character. So the second thing that we do, well, actually, this is kind of a combination of things, but we actually do what we call an illustrative plan. And the key word here is illustrative, okay? What you're going to see in an illustrative plan are the streets, and you're going to see existing buildings, and you're going to see new buildings, and you're going to see all kinds of things like that. But it is purely illustrative. It's intended to show how an area or how a certain block or lot or half a block could redevelop in the future. Okay, according to sort of the vision that we've heard so far. And it is a work in progress as well. And again, you're going to see work in progress several times throughout this, and we've been hitting on this. I'm just going to reiterate it again because it's very important. The purpose of this is not final. That's why we call it work in progress. We want to get your input and so forth, and we will continue to work on this as it gets refined and the downtown vision, the final vision, draft vision is presented. So, this is the illustrative plan. It's kind of you can sort of see the entire area. The buildings that you see, or the boxes that you see in dark gray, those are the existing buildings. And the buildings in that sort of reddish brown color are buildings that could be new infill buildings. So we can see that there are a lot of opportunities throughout the downtown to infill and redevelop it over time in a manner that is in keeping with the vision. And so this is kind of seeing the overall. You can see down here too the area near the rec center, which I'll talk about too. Now, we didn't illustrate all of this because a lot of this is existing neighborhood, and even though there could be some transformation there, we wanted to make sure that we were highlighting at least a little piece of all the areas. So if we zoom in on that, you can see here's our historic core, the Parkade, Main Street, a lot of buildings there. There are very few missing elements. But then once you get off of that, we have a lot more opportunity for redevelopment in those areas. Now, something else that you're going to see here too is we had to at least consider the option of, if the wastewater treatment facility or plant is moved in the future, what might happen with that? Now, one of the things that we do know, that if it were to move, we couldn't probably develop all of it. There would have to be some things that would remain in place, but there would be perhaps some opportunity for redevelopment in the future to extend the grid closer to the river and actually get some development potential out there. So that is just an illustrative that kind of shows how you would do that. It shouldn't be something that's just set off and it's its own thing. It needs to be connected to downtown if it ever redevelops in the future. Another thing that we wanted to point out here is just behind Viking, there is a really a good location potentially if they ever wanted to do any sort of redevelopment or wanted to partner with the city, that there might be an option for a parking structure there. And the only reason why we say that is just because kind of the size of the area and where it's located in terms of its between the back of Viking and the water treatment facility and so forth. There is a kind of a good area for that. But that's not the only place that we're considering that. We just wanted to, again, illustrate that as a potential redevelopment. But you can see in this that the scale of the buildings starts to break down a little bit as you move away from the main corridor. Around Main Street and in the core, the buildings are a little bit bigger. We're going to talk a little bit about a potential parking structure and how that might work, but the buildings are a little bit larger footprint there. But as you transition to the neighborhoods, the buildings start to break down a little bit. And that's where we start to see the opportunity for some of the missing middle development that we talked about. Down here near the rec center, we could not help but kind of take another look at that. What we should have done is probably just thrown up an aerial of what it is now. You see there's a couple of cul-de-sacs. It's not very well connected. If you were a pedestrian coming from this area and going to the rec center, you really have to go all the way up here to do this, and there's not a good way to make that connection. It's just sort of cut off. Not to mention there's a park right down here. So one of the things we just wanted to show, and again, we're still working through this, but the idea of possibly reconnecting the grid a little bit and trying to actually incorporate more development. So it's almost another gateway into the community. And by reintroducing that grid and creating those kind of connections, what we actually can do is start to create the sort of crossings that pedestrians feel a little bit more comfortable doing. So that's another option. Work in progress. You're going to see that. Yes, that is Waterloo right there. Yeah, and there's the rec center. Okay? You can see the highway right off there. Okay, so now let's look a little bit closer into some of these areas. And what we did after looking at the kind of overall development, the character areas and so forth, we started to take some sites. And we sort of looked at the, what might be the prototypical redevelopment options for certain sites. And again, we chose the sites, we kind of worked on this with the city. We kind of chose the sites because of their location within the downtown, or because they were vacant or had a building that wasn't necessarily contributing to the current character. So these are not, again, development sites, but they are ways to illustrate the different character that could happen in the future. So we're going to start with, and actually I'm going to talk about Main Street, the Gateway Main Street first, so I'm jumping ahead of myself. But one of the things, and it's already been pointed out about First Street, if you see that, it is that, now of course this is at Franklin, this isn't right at Main, but you can see that, and you all know, and we heard this from you, that it's a pretty hostile place if you're a pedestrian trying to cross this, But beyond that, and there are certainly improvements, as Wade pointed out, that can be made for that, the other thing is just the gateway into the community. And so here is the way that you're coming in this way. You see the new development with the Hampton Inn, the newer development here, but this isn't the most attractive. I mean, you've got really large scale fixtures and so forth. And so one of the things that we looked at was, just the introduction of lighting and the introduction of signage and so forth can start to actually create a better gateway and entrance to the city. But now, jumping back to reconnecting Main Street, one of the things is, how do we connect? Because as we pointed out, that first vision, we were right at Main Street and there's buildings on either side. It feels okay. It could be better. But when you get just a block and a half back from Main Street, this is the environment. And that's probably one of the contributing factors to why it doesn't feel necessarily comfortable walking from the parking and so forth, whether it's on street or in lots. And so one of the things that we need to look at is, what can we do to these areas in the future as we redevelop that might actually help all of those situations, including even the potential for parking. So as Wade mentioned, we are talking about, we did look at options for a parking ramp in this area. This is actually, Washington and 4th is the intersection we're going to be looking at. We got surface lots there. But the important thing to note is, because of your block size, this could actually happen on several blocks. So don't look at this as this has got to be the place. But, one of the things that you could do is you could actually put in a parking ramp here, and this was one of the images from the visual preference survey that scored the highest, which actually has active uses on the ground floor. So it's not a parking structure only. Okay? It has active uses on the ground floor, and because of the length and depth of your block, the ramp is accessed off the alley, and there's parking on the levels above the street level. So at street level, you've got active uses, but on the levels above, you've got parking. And so not only does that create a good bit of parking that could be sort of what we call a parking sink for the area, a place where you could have a lot of parking spaces in a small footprint. It also starts to do something with these streets that makes them more inviting to walk along. And that is an important part of this. So Steve Price, our great visualization expert, there he is back there in the back room, and some of you who have come by this week probably saw this in progress. He took a shot of 4th Street looking up. So the site we were just looking at with the parking structure is right back there, okay? And here is the current condition today. And what Steve does is he helps to illustrate realistically how that might change in the future and what the elements are that could make those streets better and make that connectivity to Main Street more inviting. So one of the first things to do is rework the sidewalk. Perhaps it's about trying to incorporate the same sort of streetscape improvements that have been conceptualized for the parkade and are planned to be expanded beyond this, and start to tie all of that together. Another thing is the opportunity of every once in a while maybe taking out one parking space and making sure that we get planters in there to where we can plant trees in the future. Also, lighting. That's another thing that we heard, is that it didn't really feel comfortable, that the lighting is kind of limited to the corners. And so there's an opportunity to actually incorporate lighting. So just that right there actually starts to make this more inviting. Let's take it the next step. So remember, this is a stylized parking structure. So again, you've got active uses on the ground floor. It's not parking on the ground floor, it's active uses. The parking is actually up above. But a parking structure doesn't have to look like the ugly things that we always see in so many cities. You can actually design parking structures to almost resemble buildings. And what that does, it kind of ties in with the texture and everything that you have, but it also actually serves the function of parking. Then, if you start talking about planting trees, if you start to look at opportunities of reopening the facades where the windows have been closed up, where there were doors and windows on the street level that were there before but maybe aren't now, and Craig's vac shop's still there, okay? But this right here has now been opened up. These have been reopened up, and all of a sudden, your cross street, which is connecting you to either a parking lot or a parking ramp, I want to say parking structure. That's where I come from. We always call it parking structure. But parking ramp back there is a much more enjoyable walk for a pedestrian. And that totally changes the character of what we saw in those first images as we backed away from Main Street. Or we could just leave it like this. Now, let's talk a little bit about infill in the core of downtown. So this is Main and 6th. There's Casey's there. This is kind of existing. We've got, a lot of good uses around this area. I mean, we've got a relatively new bank building. We've got the library and community center and so forth. I mean, there are a lot of good uses. But from a form standpoint, it's totally different from what we have in the core of Main Street and what you all have told us is the kind of character that you want to see in the future. Another great thing is, I guess where there probably was a house here at one point, this is now the church building, but there must have been a house there because there are some very mature trees that are in that front yard that are really beautiful. And so we were like, how could you maybe incorporate that into a redevelopment? So if we looked at a core, just extending that, all of a sudden you've got buildings potentially fronting the street. You've got buildings that maybe step back so that you can preserve that green. You've added street trees and so forth. But what you've done is you've completely flipped the character of that place. We've gone from, sidewalks that run along parking lots to sidewalks that actually run with buildings. And from a parking standpoint, there are a couple of different ways that we can address that. You've got surface parking potentially, but also the idea of being able to, especially if it's residential buildings, to tuck under a half a level so that you can actually park under these buildings. And that might allow you to even go 3 stories as much on this area and get the sort of urban form that you see and provide parking, okay? So there are many ways that you want to look at how to do that. One note about parking, by the way, and Anita hit on this, parking lots do really nothing for walkability or the tax base. I mean, using this example right here, this is mostly parking lot and one building. It does very little. But if you were to go in and preserve parking in the center of the block, but actually have buildings along the edge, you've still provided parking. You haven't eliminated it. But you've also all of a sudden created a better environment that for the pedestrian and the users of those buildings at the street edge. And that's what is hugely important about this. And there are many different ways that you can do this. It's kind of like just having a kit of parts and playing with the ways that you can incorporate parking but also get the urban edge. And if you were wondering, you've got a lot of surface parking lots. Now, I don't think we should think that every single one of those is, going to be infilled over time, but you have a lot of opportunity to recapture what you have and create some great streets with the right kind of rules to guide that infill. Now, let's talk about the transition area. This is that area that I was telling you about along Clay Street. It's not quite residential, but it's not quite, full-on Main Street downtown core. This is the corner of Clay and 4th. We chose this site. It has, 3 one-story buildings on it right now. I think they're all offices. But we wanted to illustrate how you might see different infill in the future, like a small apartment building or a small courtyard apartment building or 2 smaller multifamily apartment type buildings. Notice that in all of these, the character of the street is fairly well maintained. This is not large multifamily complexes. This is about incremental development that actually fits in well with the neighborhood. Another thing is you'll notice that the building lines are kept pretty much consistent with the historic character. Parking is located off the service lane in the back. So parking doesn't dominate. It actually is the building and the streetscape that dominates, and that is a better street and a better street for pedestrians. And there's a row house option. So Steve did another simulation at this very location. You can see the corner right there. You probably now all know, if you weren't familiar before, this is where it is. There's an option where, you've infilled with row houses. There's stoops. They're raised up. There's still a little bit of a yard in front. You could even see over time another building going in there. That's a small courtyard type building or 2 small multifamily buildings. And then once you start to bring in the street trees, all of a sudden you have a character that isn't too dissimilar from the historic character that you see in many of the neighborhoods. But the difference is that you've now provided housing types that aren't as prevalent, but all within the character. So the idea of that one big idea about having a more diversity in housing types, you can do that in keeping with the character of the community. Now, the neighborhoods. So now we've gone from that sort of transition area to down to the neighborhoods as we're transitioning to the single family areas. So this is Grove and 11th. This is Western Home right here, and they actually happen to own those 2 lots across the street. But it was flat. It was a good opportunity for us to look at and study some ways that we could incorporate those missing middle types. So one of the ways we do that, this right here is actually townhouses. There are 2 townhouses, 3 townhouses, and another 2 townhouses here. All the parking is located to the back, but the difference here, and why it's a little bit different than, let's say, the transition area, is that we don't quite have the same length of frontage, and the height is a little bit lower here because we're trying to match up better with the single family character of the neighborhoods. So you can see how that rhythm is there, but those are completely different building types. Another option might be to do 3 duplexes. Again, larger yard in the front porches like you see on many of the existing houses. You're fronting the street, parking is located to the rear. Or even the option of doing 2 4-unit buildings. Again, parking all located in the back, maybe even a carriage house with a small, 1-bedroom studio up above so that you're parking all of those units. That right there fits well within the character of the neighborhood. And all of those are different. Now, these are just a couple of images from the boards. These were 2 of the highest rated residential infill images that you all looked at, and these are the types, this is the scale and types of buildings that you would see here, but again, maintaining a little bit more of a rhythm of, facade to space in between buildings than what you see in the core of downtown or even in that transition area. We would be remiss if we didn't actually look at Cottage courts too. We've heard a lot about that. This is actually, we forgot to put the street names on here, but I think this is Grove. right? Okay, so Grove turns back here. This is mostly a single family now. I think there may be a duplex or two on this street, but we wanted to look at an opportunity because there's a portion of the alley that is improved. It kind of stops right in there. We said if this were to redevelop in the future into a cottage court, look, again, we've created a rhythm of buildings that's not too dissimilar from the existing character. These are single-family detached buildings, but they happen to either front a street or, in this case, the court of the cottage court around this green, and they all have porches and roofs and things like that that kind of fit in with the character of the neighborhood. So this is just another example of how you have a whole variety of building types that can accommodate that range of housing desires and needs, but done in a way that is keeping with that character. And then lastly, on South Main, we took the site. Here's the rec center here. Here's 13th. We took the site that the rec center actually owns. I think they might plan to expand that way or something in the future, but it was an opportunity again for us to look at a vacant site, a currently vacant site, and say, what could happen on South Main? So here is 3 row houses, a break in the building, 3 row houses, garages in the back, accessed off the alley, small courtyards behind, and then a deeper kind of setback that kind of matches up with some of the existing buildings along there. That right there on those 2 lots, you have introduced yet another building type into your downtown that can provide some immediate needs. And look, you're right next to the rec center. Now, another thing that this happens to illustrate is something that Wade talked a little bit about, and that's the idea of if we could get South Main to go to a 4-lane section, here would be those bike lanes. I mean, a 3-lane section. Here would be those bike lanes, the buffer. There's the turn lane, and the medians, the spot medians that he talked about. So it doesn't preclude a left turn here or here, but it actually starts to introduce more landscape into the street and really helps the whole area. And the other thing about this is that you're improving the mobility of this area, but you're also accommodating, as Wade said, the traffic that's there. The fact that you have alleys behind here, and especially on the fact that the west side of South Main is actually up a little bit, most of the access is happening from the back. So the idea of incorporating a spot median every once in a while is really good. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mary so that we can really kind of sum this thing up and kick it into the driveway. Yeah, kick it into the driveway. See, we're going to keep it.
Okay. So how many of you had imagined any of that we just showed you? I knew we had a lot to cover, and we've definitely gone over our 1 hour, but I want to kind of, oh no. I took us back in time. I want to just kind of give a wrap up of where we are. But I mentioned at the beginning that we attended the council's goals priority setting session. So this is something we are keeping in our mind as we move forward. I will say this is my summary because their goals were a little more verbose, but I hope that I've captured what the intent of those were. So this is what we've really been trying to start. Again, we can't say enough. This is a work in progress. We have more to do. But one thing that we were asked to do is create a plan that looks at changing over time, bring broad community input. We've definitely tried to reach out and get as many people as we can. I know sometimes the good weather maybe has been against us, but we've consistently had people come out who are actively engaged, and we've had people engaged on the website. I hope that people felt more than safe and welcome and come in and share their ideas with us. We have tried to listen and hear and test out almost everything that we've heard. And I think Anita made it clear that we also are aware that this has to make sense in the market. The city's not going to go out and just start writing checks to do all this. And so, private developers, this needs to make sense for them. We need to recognize the demographics of who lives in Cedar Falls now and who might be here in the near term. And we heard very clearly about the importance of Main Street itself and the historic character, and I think we're trying to acknowledge that. And then I think the last piece is going to happen. It may start happening immediately, but it's really going to build after we get the vision plan done and the council decides how they want to move forward with it. I believe, I think it will help them to have a clear vision of what they want to do, whether it's recruiting employers or the university recruiting faculty or just people deciding Cedar Falls is a great place where I want to come live. So that's just what the council sort of charged us with, and hopefully we're following through on that. And I think the interesting thing is how much of this, actually the input that we got directly from the citizens, I think syncs up more than probably anyone could have hoped for with the direction that we got from the council. We're getting really close to 7:30, so I don't know if everyone has eaten dinner or not. Where are we and where are we going? Next steps. Tonight, we have a very simple, quick, one-page survey that I hope someone in the back has, that we hope you'll just, literally, it should take you less than 5 minutes. I think we have surveys and pencils both. You will also, the whole presentation will be available on the web, and it's being filmed, so it will be on the city's cable channel. Encourage your friends who are not here to take a look. Encourage them to go on, give us feedback. We want feedback. We're going to be back later in the summer, and we will have a more polished, fleshed out draft vision plan for everyone to take a look at and say, yes, this is where we want to go, or no, it needs a few more tweaks. And then after that, in the fall, we will actually start taking a look at revising the zoning for the study area, because we know right now the zoning you currently have will not allow most of what's in this vision plan. So the question is, when we get the vision plan further refined and developed, what changes may need to be done with the zoning. So I want to thank you all for coming.